Okay guys, so today we're going to talk about absolute value inequalities, which if you think about absolute value, it always had two solutions, right? Well, if we think about compound inequalities, it was two inequalities, right? What ends up happening with absolute value inequalities is it turns into a compound inequality. And it's going to do kind of the same things. It's either going to go opposite directions or they're going to meet in the middle. The steps for solving an absolute value inequality, kind of have them listed right here. You isolate the absolute value, and there are no solution and special case absolute value inequalities, but we're only going to deal with the positive split into two inequality stuff this year. So you only have to worry about these steps basically. Isolate the absolute value, then split it into two inequalities, positive and negative. Solve both inequalities, graph at interval notation. So let's look at this. So right off the bat, I'm going to tell you a little trick. It doesn't say and or with these inequalities, but the direction of that absolute value when it is time to split it, so once you have the absolute value isolated, will tell you whether or not it's going to be an and or an or. So once you isolate absolute value, if it's saying that the absolute value is greater than the number, so it's eating the absolute value, that's going to be an or. It's going to go both the opposite directions. If it's less than the absolute value, so it's eating the number, it's going to be an and it's going to meet in the middle. Okay, so let's solve a couple examples and let's see if we can figure out how to do this. So first thing we got to do is isolate the absolute value. So we need the absolute value all by itself on one side. So this minus 6 is outside the absolute value, so we're going to add 6 to each side. Gives me the absolute value of m is greater than or equal to 8. Okay? Then, absolute value is by itself. This is where I split it into the two inequalities. M could be greater than or equal to 8, and then we do the negative possibility. M is something to negative 8. Now, think about this. We are changing the sign over here to a negative. This is very much just like dividing each side by a negative number. So what happens when you split these inequalities is the positive one will stay pretty much the same, but this negative one, you have to flip the sign around. So it's going to go the other direction. Okay, so when you graph it, since there's nothing else to solve here, I'm going to graph it. Negative 8 comes first, right? Then positive 8. It's saying that m is less than negative 8. And it's got the line underneath, so it's going to be a closed circle. And it's eating the number, so it's going to go to the left. Okay? And then at 8, it's going to be another closed circle. It's got the line under it, saying m is greater than 8 because it's eating the variable, so it's going to go to the right. So that would be my graph. And then my interval notation, I've got two different intervals here, so I'm going to have the two different interval notations. It's going to negative infinity would be the least number, then negative 8, parenthesis always on infinity, and then I got a closed circle, negative 8, so it's going to be a bracket. Then I put a capital U in between those two, and then a bracket 8 comma infinity. Just like our compound inequality unit. It's pretty much the same steps and everything for that. Okay, then let's look at another example. Sorry for the bell. So let's look at another example. Let's look at number 6. So the absolute value is all by itself, and so this is where I split it into the two equations. 5n minus 10 could be greater than 10, and 5n minus 10 could be less than negative 10. Let me pause it here real quick. Okay, so we split it, we changed the sign on, or the direction of the inequality symbol for the negative part, right? And then we just solve it like a normal two-step equation. I got a best friend and acquaintance on both these, right? So I would add the 10 first. You always get what the number adding or subtracting first. So add 10. It's going to give me 5n is greater than 20. And then I'd also get 5n is less than 0. Okay? Then the next step would be to divide by 5 to each side. It's going to give me n is greater than 4 and n is less than 0. So when we graph it, 0 comes first, then 4. These are both open circles, eating the number at 0, so it's going to the left, eating the variable at 4, so it's going to the right. So it would look like that. And then the interval notation, it's going to negative infinity would be the least number, and then 0 would be the greatest number. They both have parentheses, because again, for parentheses or brackets, you look at this type of circle. It doesn't have the line underneath, right? So it's open, you put a parenthesis. Put a capital U in between your two, and then you would do a parenthesis for to infinity. And that would be your answers. Okay? Not too tough, right? Let's look at another example here real quick. Let's look at this last one, number 16. Okay, so the absolute value is by itself, so we're going to split it. Negative 10 minus 9a could be less than or equal to 17, or negative 10 minus 9a could be greater than or equal to negative 17. So again, important part, when you split it, you flip the inequality sign on the negative one. Then, again, another two-step equation. We're going to add 10 to start, since it's a negative 10. It's going to give me negative 9a is less than or equal to 27, and negative 9a is greater than or equal to negative 7. And then you divide by negative 9 to each side. Now, dividing by a negative, it's an inequality. You get the warning. You got to flip the sign, right? Anytime you divide by a negative or multiply by a negative, the sign flips around. So a is now going to be greater than or equal to a negative 3, and a is going to be less than or equal to a positive 7 over 9. Okay, or some dumb decimal. So there's my two answers. So then I'm going to graph it. Negative 3 would come first, then it'll be 7 over 9. They both be closed circles. It's greater than negative 3, so it's going to go to the right. It's less than 7 or 9. They're going to meet in the middle. So my interval notation would be bracket, negative 3, and then 7 over 9, bracket, and that would be my answers. Okay? If you have any questions, ask your teachers. We're here to help. We want to help. Just got to let us help. So ask us, and I'll see you guys out there.